Marathon. Man, I just really have a bad feeling about this one, folks. Like when Destiny first came out, Destiny 2 even, while I knew there could be rough tidings with how live services can launch, there was just a general hype and a general excitement surrounding those titles where Marathon just completely lacks that. There's just a general sense of pessimism. There's a general sense of Marathon not breaking new ground, where something like Destiny did kind of establish the foundations of, live service looter shooters. And then beyond that, Marathon, it's not like there's anything wrong with somebody attempting their shot at a genre, but its version of extraction shooter just wasn't particularly well received, or it's got mixed results. Which is why if you go to, say, like SteamDB and look at its closed alpha results, you'll find a player base that, during its closed alpha, it peaked at, almost 7,000 players, but then it just quickly plummeted. And the same thing goes if you look at Twitch. Viewership for this, peaked at a certain point because it was brand new, and then people were like, well, this is just kind of like not really particularly fun. You want to see what real hype looks like? Check out, say, Battlefield 6. Now, the numbers here are for an open beta, so yes, it has hundreds of thousands of players, but it being an open beta, it makes sense that it has more players than Marathon. But I feel like if Marathon launched as an open beta, I don't think we'd see these kinds of numbers, personally. And then if you look at the trend, which is the more important part, you'll see that, Battlefield 6 is still maintaining over half of its player base continuously throughout the span of this open beta. We don't see this huge, this huge valley, this huge drop-off of players. There's this general sense that people are really enjoying the game and that the hype has been maintained continuously and that it continues to capture interest from the audience base. So already, just from the way players are engaging with the game, there's just something off about Marathon and the way it's being received. But then there's all the other elements, like all the controversies surrounding it, combined with the way it's being managed and handled. We know about the whole situation involving the way Marathon straight up just stole art from another artist. Like their assets were literally copied and pasted into the game. And, now anytime anyone looks at Marathon's art style and visuals, there's questions as to how much of that truly was original and how much of it ultimately was, at best, heavily inspired and at worst, directly lifted from other artists' work. And all the qualms surrounding the game itself, with it not being super well received, combined with that controversy, led to the game being delayed. That was announced not too long ago, and it's delayed until the current fiscal year, which ends on March of 2026. Sometime between now and March of 2026 is when Marathon is going to launch. And people are wondering, is that really enough time to overhaul the game to a degree where Marathon can stand out as something of a unique experience, or an experience that's better than what genre it's trying to tackle, especially given that the genre is, pretty well saturated with your most marquee titles for extraction shooters like Escape from Tarkov and, Hunt Showdown and whatnot. And all these questions are not just ones that gaming enthusiasts and players have, but also investors. Recently, Sony hosted a Q&A session when they conveyed their latest financial results. Sony being now the owner of Bungie after they bought out Bungie because they want to pursue live services, and they felt that buying Bungie would be a good foundation for that, and they could kind of establish live services with their many other IPs. That endeavor has not been going well. During that financial briefing, Sony CFO, Chief Financial Officer Lin Tao, responded to a number of questions, starting with when they expect Marathon to come out, to which Lin Tao said first about Marathon, how he factored it into the forecast. We expect the launch to happen within the fiscal year, so by the end of March 31st, 2026 at the latest. But having said that, there is not a commitment. No official announcement has been given yet, which means they're leaving the door open for this game to be delayed further if they feel like it doesn't meet quality standards, or just for whatever reason they might deem appropriate to delay this game. Again, they say right here that they're currently hard at work on just essentially tweaking the game, saying that we're now doing modifications in development, and based on the progress in the autumn timeframe, we believe we can communicate when we can launch Marathon, either from Bungie or PlayStation. So within the next month or two, I imagine, they're going to announce an exact release date for when this game will be delayed too. But while all that's happening, Tao is also talking about Sony's relationship with the studio Bungie, and this is where things start to get kind of worrying and somewhat questionable, with Sony trying to exert more control over Bungie. As Video Games Chronicle reports right here, Tao talks about the governance of Bungie. At the time of acquisition, we're offering a very independent environment, so that was one way of thinking. However, thereafter, we have gone through structural reform, as we announced last year, so this independence is getting lighter, and Bungie is shifting into a role which is becoming more part of PlayStation Studios, and integration is proceeding. So yeah, essentially what is being said here is that Bungie is losing its autonomy. The quote ends with, so in the long term, if you can see this as an ongoing process, the direction for Bungie is to become part of PlayStation Studios. I'm always wary about a studio losing its independence in the way that, when Activision acquired Blizzard, Blizzard very much lost a lot of its identity because Activision eventually started to interfere heavily to a point where Blizzard started to feel more like a corporate environment instead of, what they used to be. There was such a creative force back in the day when they were more autonomous. And with Bungie, look, even as an independent entity, they've not been perfect. But Sony now coming into play, it's now up to Sony to decide Bungie's fate and what they should be prioritizing. One has to wonder whether that's actually a good thing or not. Sony's ambitions lie in expanding live service endeavors. I mean, at one point, they were trying to ship like 12 live services within the span of like 3 years. And then they had to cut that in half because that was just never going to be an endeavor that was possible. But even within that, they had to cut back even further. They recently announced like cancellations for a number of live service projects, and they're backpedaling, especially with Concord having been a massive failure. That was a product that died within 2 weeks and had to refund all of its money. So whatever money that Sony spent on all that, they got $0 of it back. So while Sony is great at nurturing studios like Naughty Dog and Insomniac and Sucker Punch, who have delivered bangers after bangers, when it comes to live service, that's the area where Sony's incredibly weak. That's where they're trying to strengthen themselves through acquisitions like Bungie. But now Sony interfering with Bungie and them kind of having more of a hand and say in how they function, kind of essentially seeping their way of doing things into Bungie, I have to wonder, given their inexperience with live service, whether that's ultimately a good thing or whether it'll impact Bungie negatively, whether Sony's kind of lack of experience in the live service space and their ability to succeed in the live service space, aside from the one fluke that was Helldivers 2, if that will ultimately lead to Bungie suffering in terms of its ability to be creatively autonomous and, push boundaries. I look at Xbox and how we thought it was going to be a great thing when they acquired Activision Blizzard, when they acquired ZeniMax and whatnot. And what have they done? They have laid off a bunch of people. They've shut down a number of beloved studios. And a lot of the games that are in development have either been canceled or in troubled development. And Xbox's handling of its acquisitions has been incredibly just lackluster and confidence-defying. So Sony's acquisition of Bungie and the announcement that they're ultimately planning to integrate Bungie fully into PlayStation Studios and have Bungie see less of an independent environment for them, or as they put it, having their independence get lighter. There's just something about that, about corporations getting involved in creative endeavors on such a deeper level that always sits wrong with me because we've seen that kind of backfire time and again in the past. So that is just not something that I'm taking as a positive thing for the long-term future of Bungie and its projects and endeavors and just their creativity. Something else that was asked is if there's a possibility that Marathon itself would get canceled. And while they did not at all hint that, they are going to cancel the game, the fact that the door is left open at all with this quote is just a little suspicious. So it reads right here, we're now fixing the problems in regards to Marathon and the feedback that players have given, and obviously the stolen artwork, the plagiarism. And then the quote continues, so we believe this launch will happen. That is not particularly definitive. It's confidence that the launch will happen, but it is not them saying, come hell or high water, this game is coming out. No matter what, that is a foregone conclusion. They're not saying that. They're saying, we believe this launch will happen. And then they raise the possibility of if there's a scenario where the launch is canceled, if this launch is canceled, we'd need to do the revision of the valuation. However, as of now, this is not expected. But why is the door for cancellation open at all? Again, I'm not saying this means clearly they're going to cancel the game, but it just shows a certain level of lack of confidence where the fact that even if it's a 1% chance, that chance exists at all this far into the development of this game It just highlights that we're leaving that door open in case we have to push that red button and go nuclear and cancel Marathon in case we're about to repeat history akin to how Concord went, where they literally made $0 and lost hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't believe Marathon will be quite the disaster that Concord was, but I don't think it will make its money back at this current stage. I just don't foresee Marathon making enough money for it to be considered a commercial success. And if that's the case with a live service and it starts bleeding money, it'll get canceled not long after its launch. On the topic of cancellation, news outlet This Week in Video Games notice in this Q&A portion that when the discussion of the potential cancellation of Marathon was brought up, if that were to be a worst case scenario that happens and what the financial impact would be, Lin Tao apparently said that the financial impact would be slight. That was the insinuation when the direct quote was given as follows: "The sales are very small compared to the overall sales and the timing of launch." I'll be honest with you, this sentence kind of confused me. The sales are very small compared to the overall sales and the timing of launch. I don't understand exactly what she's trying to imply, but I don't believe for a second that if Marathon were to be canceled, that it'd be a small financial impact. Sony invested a lot in acquiring Bungie. Bungie invested a lot in Marathon. And if they just cancel that out right after all these years, all of the budget they've poured into the development of the game, into marketing, so on and so forth, that's a lot of money down the drain that they won't recoup in any way, shape, or form because, they didn't have customers to give that money back to recoup the cost, to make a profit, or even to break even. But again, I'm not saying that this game will be canceled, that that's the more likely scenario. I fully believe this game will ultimately end up launching, but the fact that the hypothetical of cancellation is there at all, and then, the insinuation that the financial impact will not be significant, I just, it doesn't paint a great picture. And then one last thing to note about Tao's statement in this Q&A session is when they were asked about Sony's overall live service strategy and their shift to invest more in that sector and how that has not gone particularly well. Tao admits on behalf of Sony that, that's been going rather poorly, but, they're making adjustments and they're trying to learn all these things. Tao had the following response to give to that inquiry. Last year, Concord. And this year, Marathon was postponed. Somewhat negative news has been coming out, but if you look 5 years ago, live service games were almost non-existent for PlayStation Studios. And you were all the better for it. You were outputting banger after banger after banger because you nurtured your studios right. You gave them that creative autonomy, and you didn't try to force and pigeonhole things into this genre that you don't see as a creative avenue. You see it as a commercial avenue, as a monetization avenue, as a profit avenue, rather than how do we take the live service genre and really make something creatively cool out of it? That's not the approach here. It's just we want to do live services because it makes money. How do we just force things that don't belong in that genre into that mold? And then that ultimately yields just generic stuff or stuff that just isn't wholly original or creatively exciting enough for them to be able to thrive in this highly competitive market, especially with live services being experiences that are long-term, that are almost part-time to full-time jobs for people, and they can only play one or two of those at the same time, whereas games that have that beginning, middle, and end, games that are more campaign, that are a complete experience after a couple dozen hours, they can move on from those, but live services demand your constant attention for years and years. So the fact that one publisher, Sony, was intending to ship all of these different live services under the same banner so they can cannibalize themselves, the strategy makes absolutely no sense. Live service games were almost non-existent for PlayStation Studios, and you were better for it. You had a good thing going, goddammit, as Mike Ehrmantraut would say. This quote continues, we have Helldivers 2, MLB, Gran Turismo 7, and Bungie's Destiny 2. So we have these 4 live services contributing to sales and profit in a stable manner. It is true that Destiny 2 does continue to draw in a lot of players. Helldivers 2, it's doing okay. It certainly, isn't where it was in its peak, especially towards the launch period, but it's certainly still very much a living live service that has a consistent amount of players and a decent player base. But with Destiny 2, they had to invest in purchasing Bungie to get that revenue, so they're still trying to kind of compensate for how much money they spent in acquiring Bungie. And then for the rest, they're stable live services, but none of them are those billion-dollar live services. That they're not Fortnite level, they're not Apex Legends level, they're not at the level of Genshin Impact, so on and so forth. That's what they're trying to chase, though, because they feel like the live services that they have now are not enough for the kind of profits that they're seeking. So they're just kind of taking their shot at every turn that they can. But a shot like Concord just really tanked them. And then now Marathon is not going well. And so, they're hoping that one of their gambles eventually wins, because it really does take one gamble taken off and making billions for that gamble to be worth it. But at what cost? I mean, you can see right here that live service revenue for Sony is not entirely stable. Tao noted how for Q1 of this fiscal year, the live service ratio was about 40% of Sony's entire revenue. For the full year, it's a little less, probably between 20 to 30%. Not insignificant by any means, but we're talking about revenue, not net gains and net loss. If we put Concord into that equation and we look at how much money Sony actually made from live service endeavors, with Concord having been like hundreds of millions of dollars into the hole flushed down the toilet, then I imagine that the profits generated from live services would actually be, not very much, or maybe even into the red. And Tao does admit that in terms of the transformation of converting Sony into a more live service focused company, or one that, partakes in that a lot more alongside its, single player campaign driven experience endeavors, it's not entirely going smoothly, says Tao. But from a longer term perspective, if you look at the changes over 5 years, you see that there has definitely been a change. And I, for one, don't think that change has been for the better. I think Sony as a brand has been more devalued in terms of the kinds of projects and experiences that they aim for, because just the live services that they've pursued so far just have not felt inspired. And the one that they do have under their umbrella that's doing well, Destiny, it was not them. That was just a purchase that they made. And they're hoping that Bungie, as a company, as they integrate that more into Sony Interactive Entertainment, they can go ahead and start integrating their capabilities to spruce up other live services that they can draw from Bungie's experience to essentially make their live service dreams come true. But I suppose time will tell whether that's how things will end up happening, or whether this will just continue to be flop after flop. And then to close things off, Tao acknowledges that their run has not been perfect and that there's still a lot of things they have to work out, saying that, of course, we recognize that there's still issues, many issues. So we should learn lessons from mistakes and make sure that we introduce live service content where there's less waste and it's more smooth. And I just don't think that they are learning from mistakes, because they continue to pursue far too many live service projects all at once. It's one thing to experiment in that arena with inspired ideas that can genuinely push that genre forward. It's another thing to just keep shooting blindly in the hopes that you hit a bullseye, and just wasting a lot of time, resources, and money, and it leading to other studios that are far more your bread and butter and can bring you a lot of creative and commercial benefits, potentially them ending up suffering. But yeah, from the lack of confidence in the way executives are talking about Marathon, and the way they even leave the possibility of cancellation open, even though I don't think that's the route that they're going for, the way they're talking about removing independence and autonomy from Bungie, to the way they talk about their live service plans, it just doesn't inspire confidence to me. I just feel like they continue to make all of the same mistakes, and they fall into all of the same traps that many other failed live services have fallen into. But who knows? Maybe they'll hit the mark with one of them and they'll prove us wrong, and they'll have the $1 billion live service that they're looking to develop in-house, and it, make the Bungie purchase worthwhile. But currently, it feels like a lot of money is being sunk into some really misguided endeavors, or endeavors that are being handled in misguided ways. But I suppose only time will tell what's going to happen with Marathon, whether it can recover, whether they can spruce the game up and overhaul it enough to rekindle interest, and whether ultimately Sony can, kind of prove that their live service pursuits will end up being worthwhile, both, commercially, but also, creatively for the players. Hopefully they can offer some unique experiences rather than the just lesser versions of the status quo. But that's just one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on what Sony had to say about the current state of Bungie, the current state of Marathon, and their plans moving forward. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.